This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to. But it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
Charles, what's he doing?
Circling the camp. Said Norge or something on the side.
It's Norwegian.
How long they been stationed there?
It says here only 8 weeks.
How many in their party?
It started with 10. There'd be 8 others left.
Anybody there?
My God, what the hell happened here?
Maybe they found a fossil. The remains of some animal buried in the ice and they chopped it out. But where is it?
Seems like they were spending a lot of their time in a little place northeast of their camp, about 5 or 6 miles.
Looks like something buried under the ice. How long you figure this has been in the ice?
I'd say the ice it's buried in is 100,000 years old, at least.
The Norwegians get hold of this, and they dig it up out of the ice.
Yes, Gary, they dig it up, they cart it back. It gets thawed out.
And how can it look like a dog?
I don't know how. Because it's from outer space. What do you want from me? Ask him.
See, what we're talking about here is an organism that imitates other life forms, and it imitates them perfectly. When this thing attacked our dogs, it tried to digest them.
Somebody in this camp ain't what he appears to be. Right now, that may be 1 or 2 of us. By spring, it could be all of us. Is there some kind of test, Doc?
Possibly. I've been thinking about a blood serum test.
He's got no way out of here. Just wants to go to sleep in the cold until the rescue team finds it. Whether we make it or not, we can't let the thing freeze again.
John Carpenter's The Thing opened in cinemas on the 25th of June 1982 in the USA and made its way to the UK 2 months later. Produced for a relatively large budget at the time of $15 million, it managed to crawl back $19 million in the USA. It's unclear how much it made worldwide, but it was deemed a failure for the studio Universal Pictures. What played a big part in the lukewarm box office takings were the reviews, which were very harsh, but also the heavy competition in the summer of 1982. The biggest hit that year was E.T., which was released 2 weeks earlier. With Steven Spielberg at the helm, this family-friendly alien adventure film was a massive crowd pleaser, and had audiences coming back to it in droves. The Thing had gruesome effects and with an alien out to kill, but audiences were clearly wanting something more light-hearted and optimistic. With the country in a state of recession, audiences wanted to come out of the cinema feeling good and not be influenced by the bleak tone of The Thing. But also many commented that it was a victim of bad timing and bad marketing by Universal Pictures. Magazine Starlog called it a cold and sterile horror movie attempting to cash in on the genre, against the optimism of E.T., the reassuring return of Star Trek II, the technical perfection of Tron, and the sheer integrity of Blade Runner. The Los Angeles Times said The Thing was despairing and nihilistic, and lacking in feeling, meaning the characters' deaths did not matter. Roger Ebert gave it a thumbs down, and felt the characters were just utilised to be jumped on by The Thing, and the film only exists to exhibit the gross-out effects. Roger said it was the bath bag movie of July. Gene Siskel, however, gave it a thumbs up, said it was a well-made movie thanks to its storytelling and use of suspense, but wished it was less ugly. Magazine Cinefantastique wrote that The Thing may be the most unloved monster in movie history, but it's also the most incredible display of special effects makeup in at least a decade. The film's special effects were simultaneously praised and criticised for being technically brilliant, but visually repulsive and excessive. Reviews called Rob Bottin's work genius, noting the designs were novel, unforgettable and colourfully horrific, and called him a master of the macabre. with the chest chomper scene demonstrated appalling creativity, with some comparing it to Alien with its famous chestburster sequence. Despite the bad reviews and underwhelming box office, the film would find a larger audience when it came to TV and home video. It would be reappraised as one of the best science fiction and horror films ever made, going beyond cult status. At the time of its release, it would have a novelisation, and due to its popularity in later years, it received board games, a video game, and a prequel in 2011, which I will explore later in the video. The film was a constant moneymaker for Universal Pictures, who have put it out on every format over the years, with special editions first starting out on Laserdisc, and new editions have appeared on DVD, Blu-ray and 4K. With every top 10 or say top 100 list of best horror movies, you will often find The Thing near the very top. Development of the film began in the mid-70s when producer Stuart Cohen brought the short story of Who Goes There to fellow producer David Foster, wanting to make a thinking man's monster movie. David liked the idea and suggested it to Universal Pictures. Who Goes There was written by John Campbell in 1938. John was one of the most important editors and writers of science fiction, and pushed it to an adult level. It had been loosely adapted by Howard Hawks in 1951, with the film The Thing from Another World. Hawks ignored about 2/3 of Campbell's story, and it didn't deal with a creature that could transform and shapeshift, but instead focused on a human form, looking basically like Frankenstein's monster, that had more in common with vegetables internally and fed off blood to survive. Universal liked the idea of making a new version of The Thing from Another World, and obtained the rights to the original novella, but also to remake the original 1951 film from Wilbur Stark, who owned the rights to 23 RKO picture films, including The Thing from Another World, resulting in him being given an executive producer credit. The first director attached was Tobe Hooper, who was under contract with Universal Pictures, but he and his writing partner weren't pleasing the producers with their ideas for the project, so the project was eventually put on hold. The success of the remake of Body Snatchers in 1978 and Ridley Scott's Alien in 1979 revitalised the project, and the producers sought out John Carpenter based on Stuart Cohen's recommendation. John had just made big waves in the industry with his independent smash hit, Halloween.
Halloween. The night he came home.
Carpenter was reluctant to join the project, for he thought Hawks' adaptation would be difficult to surpass, although he considered the film's monster to be forgettable. John was a fan of Hawks' film and paid homage to it in Halloween. Carpenter was told to read the original short story. Carpenter found the creepiness of the imitations conducted by the creature and the questions it raised interesting, and noted the story of Who Goes There was timely for him, meaning he could make it true to his day, as Hawks had in his time. John signed a contract where he could bring over a number of the crew he worked with before, and had the right to compose the score. Several writers had developed drafts for The Thing before Carpenter became involved, and he said the scripts were awful, as they ignored the chameleon-like aspect of The Thing. Carpenter did not want to write the project himself after recently completing work on Escape from New York, and he was wary of taking on writing duties, preferring to let someone else do it. The job would fall onto Bill Lancaster, who had impressed producer Stuart Cohen with his work on The Bad News Bears. Bill didn't want to remake the original 50s film, but instead returned to the source. Lancaster said he found some difficulty in translating Who Goes There to film, as it features very little action. He also made some significant changes to the story, such as reducing the number of characters from 37 to 12. Lancaster said that 37 was excessive, and it would be difficult for audiences to follow, leaving little screen time for characterization. He also opted to alter the story structure, choosing to open his in the middle of the action, instead of using a flashback as in the novella. Universal had hoped to release the movie in 1981, but it took Lancaster longer than expected to refine the script, and once finished, Carpenter felt it was one of the finest scripts he had ever read. Universal initially set a budget of $10 million, but the costs would rise due to the extensive creature effects, as Lancaster's script originally opted to keep the creature largely concealed throughout the film, but it was Rob Bottin who convinced Carpenter to make it more visible, to have a greater impact on the audience. Other costs included construction of larger sets for external and internal locations, raising the cost to around $15 million. For the cast, we have the legendary Kurt Russell as R.J. MacReady, who operates the helicopter. Kurt was cast at the last minute. They had already started filming when he joined the production. Kurt, having just worked with Carpenter on Escape from New York, began his career with the director on the TV movie Elvis. Russell would work with Carpenter 2 more times with Big Trouble in Little China and Escape from LA. After The Thing, Kurt would become a superstar, appearing in many big hits in the 80s and into the 90s. Carpenter and Russell would remain close friends, making their commentaries for the DVDs a joy to listen to. Keith David plays Childs, the chief mechanic. Many other actors were considered and tested for the role, such as Carl Weathers and Isaac Hayes, having worked with Carpenter on Escape from New York. Ernie Hudson was the frontrunner and was almost cast until they met with Keith David. Keith broke his hand in a car accident the day before he was about to begin shooting. When Carpenter and Franco saw his swollen hand, they sent him to the hospital where it was punctured with 2 pins. He returned wearing a surgical glove beneath a black glove that was painted to resemble his complexion. His left hand is not seen for the first half of the film. The late Wilford Brimley plays Blair, the senior biologist at the base.
I'll kill you!
His career as an actor started quite late, appearing in The Waltons in the 1970s, and had a few more roles until he appeared in The Thing, but to many he was seen as an unknown. Wilford would later star in Cocoon, and of course John Woo's Hard Target. Richard Masur plays Clark the dog handler. Richard worked daily with the wolf dog Jed, and his handler during rehearsals. This helped Richard and Jed's performance on screen, as the dog would stand next to him without looking for his handler. Richard at the time screen tested for Poltergeist, but things didn't work out. But Steven Spielberg did want him for E.T., but could not commit to casting him as he needed to find the kid to play Elliot. But Richard couldn't wait any longer and went with The Thing. T.K. Carter plays Niles, who works in the kitchen. He already made the leap to film in the late 70s, appearing in Southern Comfort, and later appeared in Runaway Train, and went on to have a successful career on TV. David Clennon plays Palmer, the assistant mechanic, who spends most of his time stoned. David was asked to read for Benning's role, but preferred the role of Palmer, and felt Peter did a far better job making that role more interesting than he ever could. David said the cast would obsess over the question of how they became the Thing, or if they knew they were. The late Richard Dysart plays Dr. Copper, the physician. His career started in the 50s and after The Thing, popped up in movies such as Wall Street and Back to the Future Part 3, and starred in the hit TV show LA Law. The late Charles Hallahan plays Norris, the geologist, a familiar face of TV throughout the 80s and into the 90s, and I'm sure many will remember him from Dante's Peak. Peter Maloney plays George Bennings, the meteorologist. Peter commented that the cast was shown the 50s film before filming, and he felt the movie didn't really hold up in today's world, and was excited about the new direction John Carpenter was taking. He was bitten by a dog as a kid, and since then never liked them, and was pretty worried about the dog Jed jumping up on him. Joel Pollis plays Fuchs, the assistant biologist. This would be Joel's first film, and was very excited to be part of the cast, who like him had a strong theatre background, but he was worried as he had no camera technique, and took advice from Richard Dysart. Joel would later appear in many of the popular US TV shows throughout the 80s and 90s, and is still working to this day. The late Donald Moffat plays Gary, the station commander.
What can we do? What can we do?
He had been acting since the late 50s, and has appeared in many classic films such as The Right Stuff and Clear and Present Danger. And last but not least, we have Thomas Waits as Windows, the radio operator. Thomas appeared in The Warriors from a couple of years before, and went on to appear in a number of TV movies. Thomas wanted to be called Windows on and off set. David thought it was silly and pretentious. Thomas just thought it was a good idea for his character's motivation. Principal photography began in late August of 1981 in Alaska, and filming lasted about 12 weeks. Carpenter was determined to use authentic locations instead of studio sets. A film scout located in an area just outside Stewart along the Canadian coast, which offered the project both ease of access and scenic value during the day. Dean Cundy, who had worked with Carpenter on his previous productions, pushed for the use of the anamorphic format aspect ratio, believing that it allowed for placing several actors in an environment and making use of the scenic vistas available, while still creating a sense of confinement within the image. It also enabled the use of negative space around the actors to imply something may be lurking just off screen. Art director John Lloyd, who worked on Blues Brothers and later Big Trouble in Little China, oversaw the design and construction of all the sets. Cundy suggested that the sets should have ceilings and pipes seen on camera to make the spaces seem more claustrophobic. The sets were built in Alaska during the summer atop a rocky area overlooking a glacier, in preparation for snow to fall and cover them. As they waited for winter to kick in, they began filming at Universal Pictures, where the outside heat was over 38 degrees Celsius. The internal sets were climate controlled to -2 degrees to facilitate their work. The team considered building the sets inside an existing refrigerated structure, but were unable to find one large enough. Instead, they collected as many portable air conditioners as they could, closed off the stage, and used humidifiers and misters to add moisture to the air. On the sets at Universal, the actors had to adapt to having Carpenter describe to them what the characters were looking at, as the effects would not be added until post-production. There were some puppets used to create the impression of what was happening in the scene, but in other cases the cast would be looking at a wall or an object marked with an X. Once filming had finished at Universal, the cast were then taken to the location in Alaska to shoot the additional scenes on location. Outside, once the temperature dropped so low the camera lenses would freeze and break. The crew had to leave the cameras in the freezing temperatures, as keeping them inside in the warmth resulted in foggy lenses that took hours to clean. Carpenter filmed the Norwegian camp scenes after the end sequence, making use of the American damaged base as a stand-in to save some money. After watching an assembly cut, Carpenter was unhappy that the film seemed to feature too many scenes of men standing around and talking, messing up its pace. Carpenter blamed some of his issues on his own direction, noting that several scenes appeared to be repeating events or information. He rewrote some already completed scenes to take place outdoors to provide some variety and to cut through the lengthy scenes of dialogue. Lancaster's original ending had both Macready and Childs turn into the Thing. The original novella concludes with the humans victorious. Carpenter opted to end the film with the survivors slowly freezing to death to save humanity from infection, believing this to be the ultimate heroic act. Editor Tom Ramsey suggested including a happier ending as a backup, because he felt it was a bleak nihilistic conclusion, fearing it would not test well with audiences. In the alternative take, Macready is rescued and given a blood test that proves he is not infected. The preview screenings hadn't gone well with the original ending. The producers didn't like the downbeat approach, and this alternative ending was brought up, so they used this happier version, which didn't test well either. Carpenter decided that the film was better left with ambiguity instead, but a screen was inserted over the outpost explosion to highlight the death of the Thing. Universal Pictures had hired the extremely talented Drew Struzan to design what was become a classic poster for the movie, but at the time it wasn't what Carpenter and his team wanted. The production crew weren't consulted about the marketing and publicity. John Carpenter commented that he didn't want to make a movie with a man in a monster suit, and the poster just featured what he didn't want. Dean Cundey was underwhelmed by the design, as it felt it didn't tell you anything about the picture. John Carpenter and Stuart Cohen felt the poster gave the movie this B-movie status. The film opens in Antarctica with a Norwegian helicopter pursuing a sled dog that is approaching an American research station. The Americans at the base are confused to what's going on as they see the helicopter land and explode as the armed Norwegian attempts to shoot the dog. Fearing for their lives, one of the team, Gary, shoots the Norwegian before he can kill the dog. Dr. Copper wants to find out what's been going on, and Macready agrees to take him to investigate the Norwegian base. Entering the base, they discover it's in ruins and find a frozen corpse of a man who has committed suicide. Macready discovers a huge block of ice, and he and Copper are puzzled by what was contained within it. Outside the base, they find the burnt corpse of what appears to be two twisted up human beings, which they take back to the base for further investigation. Their biologist Blair autopsies the remains and finds a normal set of human organs. Clark puts the sled dog in the kennels with the other dogs, and it soon transforms and absorbs several of them. Macready hears the dogs crying and sounds the alarm. They don't know what's inside with the dogs, but they don't take their chances, and Childs uses a flamethrower to incinerate the creature. Blair autopsies the dog-like creature and believes it's an organism that can perfectly imitate other life forms. Data recovered from the Norwegian base leads the Americans to a large evacuation site containing a partially buried alien spacecraft, which Norris estimates has been buried for over 100,000 years, and they discover where the Norwegians cut out the block of ice. Blair grows paranoid after running a computer simulation that indicates the creature could assimilate all life on Earth in a matter of years, and the dead corpses are still alive. The station implements controls to reduce the risk of assimilation, but it's too late as Bennings becomes the alien's first victim. During the 80s, it was common for movies to be extended for their broadcast on TV, especially in America, as the distributors could crawl back more money from advertising. I've mentioned this in the past with movies such as Star Trek, Dune and the Superman movies. The Thing would also be extended, but also have a number of the violent scenes trimmed. But most puzzling is that the TV cut contains a voiceover, with a narrator introducing each character with short backstories.
Gary, a 30-year army man who worked up through the ranks to become an officer.
They dub over the profanity, not as hilarious as the Robocop TV edit.
I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this stinking couch!
And with it being heavily censored, it creates jarring edits as they cut away to alternative shots. To not affect its runtime, they pad out scenes with new footage, but it's material that was cut for a reason. It makes your favourite movie basically unwatchable. In most cases, extended TV cuts were exciting to watch, but in the case of The Thing, it's one to avoid. The Thing makes use of matte paintings, opticals, miniatures and creature effects. The largest amount of work required was from Rob Bottin and his team for the special effects of the Thing transforming. Rob had previously worked with Carpenter on The Fog and struck up a good working relationship. When Bottin joined the project in mid-1981, pre-production was in progress, but no design had been settled on for the alien. Carpenter conceived the thing as a single creature, but Bottin suggested that it should be constantly changing and able to look like anything. As part of the thing's design, it was agreed anyone assimilated by it would be a perfect imitation and would not know they were the thing. In designing the thing's different forms, Bottin explained that the creature had been all over the galaxy. This allowed it to call on different attributes such as stomachs that transform into giant mouths and spider legs sprouting from heads. Bottin said the pressure he experienced caused him to dream about working on designs, some of which he would take note of after waking up. Cundy worked with Bottin to determine the appropriate lighting for each creature. He wanted to show off Bottin's work because of its details, but was conscious that showing too much would reveal its artificial nature, breaking the illusion. As a preemptive move against any censorship, Bottin suggested making the creature's violent transformations and the appearance of the internal organs more fantastical using colours. The decision was made to tone down the colour of the blood. Although much of the filming had been completed by that point, the creature effects used a variety of materials including mayonnaise, creamed corn, microwave bubblegum and KY jelly. During filming, then 21-year-old Bottin was hospitalised for exhaustion, pneumonia and a bleeding ulcer, caused by his extensive workload. He had put himself under so much pressure. His dedication to the project saw him spend over a year living on the Universal lot. Bottin said he did not take a day off during that time and slept on the sets or in the locker rooms. To take some pressure off his crew, Bottin enlisted the aid of special effects creator Stan Winston to complete some of the designs, primarily the dog thing. With insufficient time to create a sophisticated mechanical creature, Winston opted to create a hand puppet. Winston refused to be credited for his work, insisting that Bottin deserved sole credit. Winston was given a thank you in the credits instead. In the chest chomp scene, Bottin accomplished this scene by recruiting a double amputee and fitting him with prosthetic arms filled with wax bones, rubber veins and jello, and wore a mask of the actor. The effect of the Norris Thing's head detaching from the body to save itself took many months of testing before Bottin was satisfied enough to film it. Stop-motion expert Randall William Cook developed a sequence for the end of the film where MacReady is confronted by the gigantic Blair Thing. Randall created a miniature model of the set and filmed wide-angle shots of the monster in stop-motion. He spent a lot of time animating a lengthy sequence, but Carpenter was not convinced by the effect and used only a few seconds of it. It took about 50 people to operate the actual Blair Thing puppet when it appeared in close-ups. The highly talented Albert Whitlock, who worked for Alfred Hitchcock, provided the matte paintings. For example, the team discovering the giant alien spaceship buried in the ice, and when they find a hole in the ice where the thing was cut out by the Norwegians. The miniature of the alien craft was designed by Suzanne Turner, who shot the craft with a motion control camera against a matte painting of Earth, which was made up of 4 passes. These were completed at John Dykstra's company Apogee. The opening logo was a clever but simple effect, produced by FX wizard Peter Curran. He made use of a fish tank and put smoke into it, and on the back he put the title of the thing on an animation cell. But behind that he put a garbage bag and stretched it over the frame, and had a light pointed up through the letters at the title. He hit the bag with a flame and the bag would open up through the letters to have the titles burn on screen. What can I say about the creature effects which hasn't already been discussed over the years? They are flawless, incredible execution. I think many are still baffled how they did it. But also shocking, Rob Bottin and his team weren't nominated for an Academy Award. It's a shame they didn't use the go motion technique pioneered on Dragon Slayer from the year before, so the end sequence would look a bit more effective. So we end up with a final battle that is cut short, and I just wished it went on for longer. But despite that, it's a pretty flawless movie with its visual and special effects, and being over 40 years old, it's an amazing achievement. With John Carpenter being an accomplished composer himself, having provided the score to all his features so far, it was surprising to many that he would hire someone else, enlisting Ennio Morricone, who Carpenter was a fan of and wanted the film to have this European sound. John flew to Rome to meet with Ennio to convince him to take the job. Ennio was surprised he wanted to hire him, but gladly took the job and followed what Carpenter had done previously, and developed a tape filled with synthesizer music, as he was unsure what type of score Carpenter wanted. They will later watch the film together, but no ideas were exchanged, and Morricone went off and wrote on his own without any advice. Morricone would end up writing a complete separate orchestral and synthesizer scores plus one combined, so Carpenter had the freedom to use what he wanted. Carpenter picked a piece closely resembling his own scores that became the main theme used throughout the film. When it came to cutting the score with the picture, John realised that there were places, mostly scenes of tension, where Morricone's music would not work. So Carpenter and his longtime collaborator Alan Howarth separately developed some synth-style pieces over a couple of days, which was about 5 or 6 cues. John said the new cues were very simple electronic pieces. It was almost tones. It was not real music at all, but just background sounds, something today you might even consider as sound effects. In total, Morricone produced a score of approximately 1 hour that remained largely unused, but was later released as part of the film's soundtrack, which arrived on LP, totaling 10 tracks. At the time, Starlog reviewed the soundtrack and said it was unbearably dull and repetitive, making it difficult to listen to. So it appears Starlog didn't like the movie and the score. The main theme for The Thing is instantly recognisable, it's simple but effective, but for the rest of the score the music is mostly deployed as background sounds, with not much variety, but it's all there to set the mood. Some of Morricone's synth themes are a bit strange, and you can tell why they were dropped. His orchestral pieces, which remain in the movie for the most part, really invoke the sense of dread, especially at the Norwegian base, and back at the American Research Centre when the team begin to realise their worst fears. I think if Morricone and Carpenter had a better collaboration and strong communication, there could have been a score that was more elaborate, but as it stands, the music produced does provide what is needed for this type of story, and it's so recognisable. I wouldn't want to change it, but I do think for the ending in particular, a more epic score could have been utilised. With many horror movies getting video game adaptations during the 80s and even into the 90s, with the likes of A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. The Thing never seemed to find any interest from game developers until 2002, when Computer Artworks went with the idea of a follow-up to the 1982 film. With the story of Captain Blake arriving at the outpost to find what happened at the research centre and discovering MacReady has gone missing. You encounter other survivors with your team, and with the aliens still alive, it becomes difficult on who to trust. The game was endorsed by John Carpenter, who has a cameo appearance in the game. The Thing was a commercial success, selling over 1 million copies worldwide across all the gaming platforms, and received generally positive reviews. Many praised the graphics and intriguing gameplay, such as its trust system, but the controls were criticised for being wonky and a little frustrating to get used to, and the repetitive nature of fixing fuses as a form of getting from point A to point B. For fans of The Thing, it provided enough for them to sink their teeth into, and for fans of survival horror who weren't familiar with the film, it still provided enough entertainment. Being a licensed game, it never got re-released or made compatible with modern systems, resulting in fans having to dust off their old consoles, or like most people, resorting to emulation. Playing the game now, I thought it was a lot of fun. The controls did take a bit of getting used to. The graphics haven't dated too badly and look their best on a PC. As a fan of the movie, I thought it was cool to revisit the locations, and thankfully it's a good licensed game, when so many were hit and miss. Due to the success of The Thing over the years on home video, Universal Pictures saw the potential to return to the property, with a prequel focusing on the Norwegians who originally discovered the alien beast. The writers expand on these events, introducing American paleontologist Kate Lloyd, who is recruited by Dr. Sander Halvorsen and assistant Adam Finch to investigate the findings of the body in the block of ice. Of course, the alien escapes and goes about killing the team and attempts to return to its craft. As the film ends, it leads into the opening of the original 1982 film. Universal Pictures had test screenings of an early version of the film shown to focus groups, the reaction to which the studio interpreted as negative. In response, many scenes involving character development were either cut from the film or reshot to be shortened, as the studio disliked the slow pace. The original ending had Kate finding the corpse of the alien pilot of the spacecraft, discovering that it had accidentally come into contact with the Thing, a bit like the space jockey in Alien, and deliberately killed itself by cutting its own air supply and crashed its own ship in an attempt to kill the Thing. For the new ending, ADI's practical animatronic alien pilot was replaced by a CGI display of rapid shifting cubes, looking like Tetris, and the addition of a CGI Sander Thing was created at the last minute. Another concern during the test screenings was the use of practical effects that made the film look too much like an 80s movie. The original film was highly respected for its incredible in-camera creature effects, and the talented folk at Studio ADI would want to follow in those footsteps. But decisions were made to replace what they had painstakingly planned and shot with CGI. Alec Gillis of ADI revealed that while the creature designs for the film remained mostly intact, most of their practical effects ended up being digitally replaced in post-production. The director of the film has since expressed regret over replacing the film's practical effects with CGI, saying, "I know this is a debated topic. We were caught in a cross zone where animatronics were old-fashioned and CGI wasn't good enough. We made the wrong decision to do it in post-production when it came to making the monster design in the computer. I regret that now. Now I know most fans of horror and the original 82 classic don't like this movie, mostly down to the use of CGI, but I do think the story is generally interesting, the performances are splendid, the score is fantastic, and it's a well-directed movie that has ultimately been screwed over by the short-sightedness of the studio, forgetting what made the original so fascinating by instead focusing on computer effects that weren't up to the job, resulting in actors running away from computer game monsters. Also, calling it The Thing made it confusing to general moviegoers that thought it was a remake, though critics did point out it was a remake masquerading as a prequel. They should have given it the name of the original 50s film, The Thing from Another World. Maybe one day they'll put out the original cut, featuring the animatronic creature effects and removing the lousy CGI. Whenever people talk about horror classics, The Thing is often mentioned. It's hard to ignore its strengths as a straight-up horror picture and its masterful creature effects. Very few movies have matched its creativity and style. It's Rob Bottin's greatest work and is probably John Carpenter's best feature film, though Big Trouble in Little China comes very close.
Yeah! Where'd you get that?
The Thing wasn't a movie I saw as a kid and even aware of, as my parents would certainly say no to the idea of me watching it. My older sister didn't own it, so I couldn't sneakily watch it like I did with RoboCop. And it wasn't until the late 90s I got to see it thanks to the arrival of DVD. The Thing was an early DVD release that had a bunch of special features that were ported over from the Signature Collection Laserdisc. I would get into the Laserdisc format around this time. I didn't know what to expect from the film. I knew it was a John Carpenter flick, so I knew I was in for a good time, but I had no idea how graphic the monster effects would be. I don't think I found it scary. I'm sure I was spooked by it as I watched it for the first time. But a sense of paranoia and suspense was really on point throughout. Once the Thing attacked, I was grossed out, but also fascinated how they managed to achieve this, as the elaborate effects we were seeing in the film compared to what we were seeing at the time was so heavy on CGI, which didn't give you a sense of believability. Watching The Thing at that point, which was around 15 years old, was kind of mind-blowing. Me and my friends from college would go through the special features on the DVD and devour what was on offer to really dig deep into how Rob Bottin managed to pull this off. This really kickstarted my obsession with making of documentaries on movies, and grabbing laserdiscs and DVD was the perfect way to expand my knowledge of filmmaking. When you look back at the 1950s movie, it's well made, has great performances, but I find it difficult to understand why people were so dead against a remake, and the fans at the time were aggressively hating John Carpenter's new take. I can understand for a generation that the original Howard Hawks feature was important to them, but I don't think it really stands up as a strong science fiction film. It doesn't have an interesting monster, and it rarely has any screen time, though the sequence of it being set on fire is very impressive, but the story itself was so ripe to be explored again with something closer to the book. The invasion of the body snatchers was successfully remade, and the idea of redoing The Thing would seem to the studio and creatives involved as something that should follow similar success, but that wasn't the case. The Thing is not a complicated story, it's very simple. Its focus is how the Thing begins to copy those at the research centre, and the characters begin to become paranoid about their safety and who to trust. It gives you enough information to set up the alien and how it goes about its business. The film never really makes it clear on how people become infected or say copied by the Thing. We have some visual clues, but a lot of it's left to one's imagination. And also, how do they know if they've been taken over? What we see is that Bennings is bitten by the dog early on, but he doesn't seem to have been assimilated, but instead is attacked by the remains they found at the Norwegian base. As they discover these corpses are still alive, we see Norris in shadow get approached by the dog, and he has a heart attack later on, and Copper tries to revive him, and the Thing attacks in retaliation. Did Norris know he was taken over and hiding it? I know John Carpenter suggested that the Thing operates like an inner monologue and tells the host to do something, but that is not made clear in the film at all. Blair, who autopsies the bodies, comes into close contact with the alien, and the pencil he uses to point out on the dog Thing creature, he touches his lip. Is that the point in which he becomes infected? Or when he's on his own in the tool shed, as he seems pretty concerned with the rate of infection and doesn't want anyone to leave, which would suggest he is normal, but clearly lost the plot a bit. How did Palmer become infected? We never see him come into contact with the alien. Who attacks the blood supply as only Gary and Copper have access to the key? And we find out they weren't infected. Could this have been Norris or Palmer? But they weren't aware of that conversation to test the blood to see if they were human or not. When they do the test, you have a shot of Palmer who pulls an expression that he knows he will be caught out. So did he know the entire time he was the Thing? Why didn't the Thing attack Clark? Did it not see him as a threat or worthwhile to assimilate? Who was trying to frame MacReady? It would make sense if it was Palmer or Norris, or perhaps it was Blair who managed to get out of the tool shed to plant the seeds to turn them against Macready, who is very much in charge now. Did Fuchs commit suicide? And who did he come into contact with to do this? How did Blair manage to dig an underground base to build his craft to escape in such a quick amount of time? What happened to Niles at the end? We never see him die, he just disappears off frame, and we are left to presume Blair killed him. I'm guessing they didn't have enough time to film his death. When we see Childs at the end, do we believe his story? That he left his post because he thought he saw Blair? Could he have been attacked in that time, and is he the last person remaining to be infected? You could argue fairly that there are some plot holes, but does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? Not really, as this isn't some sort of murder mystery, and with its use of ambiguity, it makes it fun to play the guessing game with friends, so you can draw your own conclusions. The Thing was criticised for its poor characterisations, which I don't fully support. I think the film provides enough information to understand his characters and their place within the team. It's clear they have been there a long time and tensions are high, and when the Thing is in their presence, it just adds to the drama, and they begin to distrust one another quickly, and a lot of infighting kicks off. The original 50s film had a couple of female members of the team. They made the creative choice with the remake to focus on an all-male cast, which may have been done to avoid them having distractions or having emotional connections perhaps. With John Carpenter and cinematographer Dean Cundy working together, you know the look of the movie is going to be amazing, and the use of the anamorphic 2:3:5:1 frame is going to be used to the fullest, as the Thing is so perfectly composed with its shots. So many movies now shoot in this aspect ratio and totally waste it, and spend a majority of their shots in close-ups. A prime example is Bohemian Rhapsody from a few years ago. This scene, which isn't particularly well edited, is shot in complete close-up for the entire thing, and it's so poorly staged and blocked out. What you see with the Thing is that everything is intended to be shot in a very specific way. The placement of the characters, how they move within the frame, and how the camera follows them. It's perfectly staged and gives what is a claustrophobic movie a larger scope, but still gives you the impression something is lurking around the corner.
Who's that?
I can sympathise with people's reaction to the Thing back in 1982. It's not a feel-good movie or uplifting in any way. From the get-go, it's bleak, and once the Thing begins to attack, you feel the team aren't going to survive this encounter, and are totally outmatched by the alien who can transform into any monstrous creature to defend itself or attack its unwilling victims. It's essentially a virus in physical form that can wipe out a large population over a few days, but it's the approach and situation we are confronted with within the story that makes it really fascinating and entertaining on another level. It's played very straight with a couple of moments of humour to break up the tension and horror on display, but the journey of seeing these normal men coming face to face with a monster that seems unstoppable. Even if you kill it, burning it is the only way to defeat it. Once you're out of options though, to set it on fire, you are in serious trouble. It's a shame John Carpenter's career was affected by the film. He put all his efforts into this picture and got savaged by the critics. He took it hard and in recent years says he still hasn't fully recovered, as his career was on a high. The Thing took him way down, and it would negatively impact him over the years. But he wouldn't have to wait that long for people to realise the film was a masterpiece of the genre. It's really hard to fault The Thing. You could argue that perhaps having some female characters would have added some emotional connections for the team, or having one of them in a relationship that could have been developing that ends up being cut short due to the arrival of the Thing, as they don't seem entirely sympathetic to their teammates being killed off, outside of Gary, who seems upset about the death of Bennings. But that's only really nitpicking. What has already been well established from the get-go that this film is not concerned with the traditional methods of storytelling, with avoiding any romantic elements and having a happy ending. It wants the brutal reality of having a group of men who are trapped in a hostile environment and don't trust one another, as a monster from the far reaches of the universe is out to kill them. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and click the bell to be notified of my latest retrospectives and reviews. Big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to get involved and gain early access to my content and exclusive videos, then follow the link below.